فليصم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah Munasab. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase in your knowledge. Very beautiful recitation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. So now we will come to the today's program. Our today's guest is Mufti Muhammad Shujat Ali Nadwi Sahab, mashallah. He is well known in our local community. He is Imam at Masjidul Haq. And mashallah, he is a good speaker and knowledgeable person. He graduated with a very famous Darul Uloom in India, Nadwatul Ulama. And mashallah, serving this community for more than 20 years. So inshallah, we will benefit today from his immense knowledge. So I request Mufti Sahib to come and address the sermon, inshallah. And in the end, we will give some time for the question answers. If anyone who have the question regarding this topic, so inshallah they can ask their question. So Mufti Sahib request is, if the question is written, it will be very easy for us to reply. And if there is no time, then we can text the answer, reply to them if they give us the phone number, contact number with their questions. Jazakumullah khair.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين، وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على خاتم النبيين حبيب رب العالمين المجتبى المصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من تبعهم بإحسان ودعا بدعوتهم إلى يوم الدين، وبعد. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا يقربنا إليك يا رب العالمين. اللهم افتح لنا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أضل أو أضل، أزل أو أزل، أظلم أو أظلم، أجهل أو يجهل علي. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير، وبك نستعين يا فتاح. آمين. Respected ulama kiram, honorable brothers, elders, mothers and sisters, and dear youth, it's a pleasure and honor to be at this masjid and to be among yourselves. We hope and pray this 1 hour time that we have, may Allah allow us to benefit from this, and may we draw ourselves closer to the Creator and Quran, because that is at the essence of the discussion that we have. My dear brothers and sisters, the known fact about Islam is this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. The very purpose of the creation of human beings, as Allah has outlined and explained in this ayat, is لِيَعْبُدُونَ, so that we worship Him. Worshipping our Rabb is the purpose of life. And ibadat is not possible without the ma'rifah. without understanding who our Creator is and what does He want from us. And therefore, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, rahimahullah ta'ala, the known philosopher and the mufassir, and also a faqih of the past, he mentioned in the tafsir of this ayat, if you really trickle down the entire religion and summarize, you can come up with two foundational principles. The first being al-ubudiyyatu ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to worship our Rabb. And the second being is how to have a good relationship with other human beings around us. So what I wanted to start off is this point that Islam is the religion of worship. And the concept of worship in Islam is quite complex, quite deep, quite profound. It is something that is very unique in our faith, that no other religion in the world can compete or rival with this. It is of different types, it is of different kinds. For example, there is a form of worship that relates to our wealth, the financial form of worship, zakat. There is a physical form of worship. There is a spiritual form of worship. And likewise, ibadat differs from time and place. For example, there are ibadat that are related to time. As we know, there are ibadat that are related to places, like Hajj. And there are ibadat that are perpetual, that repeat and reoccur over and over again, but also relates to time as well, like Salat. So among the forms of ibadat that we all engage and do and worship our Lord through is fasting. Month of Ramadan is just around the corner, and it is just about the few days away. And we hope and pray that before it comes, we are ready to receive it. One of the interesting things that the scholars have mentioned, Sahaba Rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, when Ramadan was prescribed, it was in the second Hijri, and it was in the month of Sha'ban like this. And to be more specific, the date in which the fasting of Ramadan was prescribed was the 10th of Sha'ban. 10th of Sha'ban. Now, what is interesting to me, personally speaking, they were only given 20 days of window to prepare themselves to fast the month of Ramadan. Just 20 days. So when they were given this prescription of fasting in the month of Ramadan, how were they able to make the best of it despite being given this short notice, as we call it? Because they were always ready and close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their lives. And that is something that makes them very unique and different than all of us, though we also pray as they did. Alhamdulillah, at least we try, right? We also try our level best to read Quran and do other righteous deeds. But the essence which put them at a different pedestal altogether compared to us was this, they had this connectedness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we call taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, governing their lives all the time, 24/7. And therefore, the purpose of fasting was already present in their life prior to the prescription of Ramadan. They were already muttaqi, and therefore it took them to the next highest level when they started the month of Ramadan. So that is very, very important, my dear brothers and sisters, that we understand the holistic concept of ibadat in Islam. Number two, the types of ibadat. Number three, what is so special about Ramadan? The unique form of worship that we are prescribed, we have been commanded, and we have been demanded, in fact, by our Rabb. It is not a matter of choice, right? We know fasting in the month of Ramadan is not optional. It is obligational. It is an obligation. Whether you like it or not, whether you are comfortable with it or not, you have to comply in order to prove your faithfulness to your Rabb, commitment to your religion. So the uniqueness of the month of Ramadan, that it has a unique form of ibadat that is known as fasting. And Fasting, my dear brothers and sisters, that's the second point that I want to share here, is it's a very, unique in each and every sense of the word, this ibadat, that there is nothing that you can compare this ibadat with any other one. There is no other form of ibadat. There is no other form of worship that can compete with fasting in Islam. And when we talk about fasting, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam described, in one hadith that is known as Hadith Qudusi, the sound narration. In authentic narration, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what fasting is all about and what a person can get out of that. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كل عمل ابن آدم, all what we do as human beings, as ibadah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يضاعف, the actions, they are multiplied in terms of the reward, in terms of the benefits and the blessings. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, lahu, له بعشر حسنة أمثالها. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, له حسنة بعشر أمثالها, that each good deed a believer does, the minimum reward that he gets out of that is 10, as we know. And then Rasulullah ﷺ said, إلى 700 ضعف, from 10 to 700 times. So all, including Hajj, including Zakat, including Salat, and all the other forms of ibadah, Prophet ﷺ said, Allah says, it has a cap number of reward. It has a fixed number of reward in between. But Allah يضاعف لمن يشاء, to whoever Allah wishes to increase them in ranks and reward, that is up to Allah. But the general standard and principle that we have is from 10 to 700. From 10 to 700. إِلَّا الصَّوْمِ, with the exception of one particular ibadat, and that is fasting, Rasulullah said. إِلَّا الصَّوْمِ, Allah says, with Allah excluded from the list fasting, and then said, إِلَّا الصَّوْمِ فَإِنَّهُ لِي. Although we pray, like for example, we pray 5 times a day, the goal is to worship Allah, whatever we do, right? But Allah Himself has singled out fasting from the list of all ibadat by saying, إِلَّا الصَّوْمِ, with the exception of fasting, فَإِنَّهُ لِي. So how do you translate this? By saying, it is exclusively for me. It is exclusively for me. And Rasulullah said, Allah says, وَأَنَا أَجِزِي بِهِ, and therefore I will be the one rewarding it directly. I will be the one rewarding it directly. And according to the other hadith, it is read as, فَأَنَا أُجِزَى بِهِ, I myself will become the reward for the fasting person because of his fast. SubhanAllah, look at the amount of reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised here. And therefore, Prophet ﷺ said, when a Sahabi, Abu Umama al-Bahili radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, came to Prophet ﷺ and he asked, Ya Rasulullah, could you give me a piece of advice? A piece of advice that I could hold on to, I could practice seriously. Prophet ﷺ said, فَعَلَيْكَ بِالصَّوْمِ فَإِنَّهُ لَا مِثْلَ لَهُ. Take fasting very seriously. Generally when it comes to fasting, we only think of Ramadan and we think of fasting in Ramadan, which is of course fard and obligation. But when we look at the life of Rasulullah and Sahaba Rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in in general, what we learn is that fasting was a regular practice in their life. As mashallah Maulana Sa'ad Sahab has just announced, Ayyamul Bid. And that wasn't it. Each week Rasulullah would fast minimum 2 days. If you look at the overall amount of fasting that Rasulullah would do each year, scholars, they have calculated, and roughly they said it would be from 5 to 6 months minimum Rasulullah would spend his time in a year in observing the fast. 5 to 6 months, right? Because 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, whole month of Ramadan, and whole month of Sha'ban, right? And 3 days in addition to that, each week, and also each week 2 days. On top of that, like Muharram, Shawwal. So just you put all together, you will see that more than half a year in the life of Rasulullah was in the state of fasting. It is something that we have taken a back seat in regards to observing it more regularly, because it is As Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala says, وَهُوَ مُجَاهَدُ النَّفْسِ فِي الْحَقِيقَةِ. The true mujahadun nafs comes when a person observes the fast, because you really are fighting against many things, against hunger, against desire, against many things. So therefore the true mujahadun nafs is in observing the fast. Therefore it says not many people will succeed in doing so. So this is just to set the stage of and the theme for the discussion that we have. And each and every ibadat in Islam has two aspects to it. There is one internal and there is one external. There is one zahiri and there is one batini. So what we call ruh, the spirit of ibadat, and the other one is the structure of ibadat. So a spirit of ibadat refers to asrar, which is like the inner dimensions, the of salat and zakat and hajj, and Imam Ghazali, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, and others, they have talked about. And there is external aspect of it, which is fiqh of salat, fiqh of zakat, and also fiqh of siyam. In order for us to reach the inner depth of any form of worship, listen to this carefully, in order for us to reach the inner depth, the goal of whatever it may be in terms of the fasting or ibadah or a form of ibadat, we need first to fix a structure, which is what we call fiqh. Because if fiqh is missing, you cannot attain to the ruh of ibadat. You cannot attain to the ruh of ibadat because you have messed up the very foundation of it. And therefore it will not be possible for the person to reach the pinnacle in that. And therefore we have to first understand the basics of fiqh, basics of fasting in terms of the ahkam al-shar'iyya, and that will pave our path and our journey to reach the climax, reach the destination, and reach our set goals. So that is what we need to understand. Now, in terms of ahkam pertaining to the fasting, I want to make one disclaimer that I want to share here. As we know, fiqh is a very deep subject, a very vast subject. It's a subject that is in between two very broad ends. What fits in between the two is four madhahib al-fiqhiyya and beyond even. Right? Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali, and even Zahiri and others. So my goal and intention is to primarily focus on one particular fiqh that I have studied and I am expert in, which is Hanafi madhab. But at the same time, along the lines, I would try to make reference to other madhab. For those of us who are not the follower of Hanafi madhab, at least are able to relate to certain things. Because all of these differences that we have in the very huge corpus of fiqh and the literature of fiqh, they stem from the same source, Quran and Hadith, and ijtihadat of Sahaba rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in. So in terms of fiqh Hanafi, it relies on ijtihadat of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and a portion of it also belongs to Ali radiyallahu anhu. So that is a topic of its own. So looking at the ahkam al-shar'iyya pertaining to the fasting of the month of Ramadan, it is a topic that can be divided into many segments, right? And it is not a motivational talk. One of the humble requests that if I may make, generally, because it is something that this topic suits more to a workshop type discussion, right? Where we listen attentively and take possibly notes that are very important, because there is a hadith of Rasulullah and also a saying in Arabic, al-ilmu saydun wal kitabatu lahu qaydun. Knowledge is like a free flying bird. Knowledge is like a free flying bird. And the way to preserve it is to pen it down. And therefore, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran when Allah speaks of the knowledge and the importance of knowledge, and He also talks about the medium to preserve the knowledge. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم بالقلم. So therefore, we should get into this habit whenever we are attending any program or any lecture or any muhazara or khatira, that alhamdulillah, if we don't have pen and paper, at least we all have this, right? Phones. So make better use of it, at least the youngsters, and you can take notes in that. Because when you write, one of the benefits of writing that it will help you remember easily. Anyway, so the first thing is the very terminology itself. The very terminology itself. 6:45. The Arabic term for fasting is siyam or psalm, right? Psalm or siyam. And the literal meaning of the word is al-imsak, unconditional restraint. Someone who stays away from something, it is referred to, this act refers to psalm in Arabic, and imsak is similar. And we find this meaning in the Quran mentioned in different places. For example, when Allah speaks of Maryam alayhi salam and her withdrawal from the society that she was part of. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded her that she announces to anyone that she comes in contact with to say, إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. The type of psalm that she referred to over here was just to abstain the talking. So this shows the meaning, the literal meaning of the word psalm. The technical definition of the word, of course, is what we need to understand. So it means that to stay away from certain activities, You know, I talked about ibadah, right? In Islam, the concept of ibadah, as I said, is very deep and complex. You worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at times by doing certain things. On the other hand, you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at times by avoiding certain things. If you look at the nature of fasting, what you are required is not really to do something, rather to stay away from certain things. Two, it's called like passive ibadah. There's one active ibadah and there's one passive ibadah. So fasting is seen as a passive form of activity, where you are required to stay away from certain things, and that in itself is a form of worship because you are complying and following the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the definition of fasting is that a person stays away from primarily three things: food and drink and conjugal relationship with one's spouse. And there is a set time in between that a person has to stay away from. And it is from dawn, from Tulur al-Fajr, all the way until Ghurub al-Shams, the sunset. So in between this time frame, a person who stays away from these things, he is seen or she is seen as a person who observes the fast. And so this is the literal and technical definition. Now, the next point, when does fasting become wajib or fard on the person? It is true that fasting is not fard on all people, right? Who are the people excluded from the obligation? It is also a list. So we all understand and we know that this hukum is not applicable to all. So who are the people that are the one that fit in this description? So there are three foundational prerequisites a person has to meet in order for the fasting to become fard on him or her. What is the first one? Anyone? The first condition in this regard, the prerequisite.
Age or maturity.
Sickness. So in terms of the prerequisite, the shurut is what I'm talking about. And this is, by the way, all the fuqaha they agree on, whether it's Maliki or Shafi'i or Hanbali or Hanafi. So they all agree that there are three minimum conditions that a person, then there are some madhahib that have added that the al-ilm will be fardiyat al-siyam, especially somebody who is new to the religion. Somebody who is new to the religion, so he must also know, or she must also know, that this act is an obligation indeed. So the three prerequisites, the shurut that we have, number one, the very foundation is Islam. Do we require non-Muslims to fast? Of course not, right? So a person has to be Muslim first and foremost in order for him or her to fulfill this obligation. Number two, as some of you said, al-aql, which is sanity. A person has to be sound, mentally fit. who is able to, and because this is the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How so? Because somebody who is not mentally sound and stable, he or she is not able to even reason and understand that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, children, they are exempt from this, right? Therefore, children are exempt from this. So somebody who is Muslim and has reached the age of, has this sound intellectual capacity. And the third is, of course, bulugh. A person has to be baligh. So these are the three prerequisites. And there is a hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam which is mentioned that in Abu Dawood. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Rufi'a al-aqlamu an al-thalasa," that pen has been uplifted from three categories of people. Yani they will not be held accountable for any religious ruling. As-sabiyyu, a child, and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, a lunatic, until a person comes to the reason. And Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also mentioned, in the list of that, the person who is al-majnoon hatta yaqil, wa al-sabi hatta yahtadim, wa al-na'im hatta yastayqiz. A person who is asleep until he wakes up, there is no obligation on him. So when we talk about this hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we understand that these are the three prerequisites. So therefore, children who are underage, they are exempt from fasting. What do I mean by underage? Those who have not reached the age of puberty, generally speaking, 13 and 14. One more point that is important for us as parents in this regard, although children, they are not obliged to fast, but they are highly encouraged to fast. And it is the parents and wali. Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala mentions, وَهَذِهِ مَسْئُولِيَةُ الْوَلِيِّ. It is the responsibility of the wali, the one who is guardian, like parents, to encourage and motivate the children to observe the fast, especially if it is not going to bring any harm to them physically. And we find a hadith, Rubai' bin Mu'awwad bin Affar radiyallahu ta'ala anha, she says that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded us to fast, this was the fast in the month of Muharram. In the month of Muharram. And before Ramadan became fard, according to certain scholars, fasting on the 10th of Muharram was an obligation. Fasting on the 10th of Muharram was an obligation. But when fasting in the month of Ramadan was prescribed, that abrogated the fasting of the 10th of Muharram. And then it remained nafl. But she says, when this hukm was given to us, so we took this religious ruling, although it was an option, so serious that we would make sure our children would also observe the fast. They would be as little as 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, although fasting is not fard on them, and it is a nafl fasting. So we would make sure that they are trained on this, and we would give them toys to distract them from hunger, feeling hungry, and all the way until they complete the fast. So this shows the spirit that the women had in those days. So we should try at least our level best to encourage our children to observe the fast. So the next point, after we discuss the definition of fasting and the very foundational requirements, after a person meets these three requirements, these three conditions, prerequisites, then it is not enough for the fasting to become completely fard on the person. There are two additional conditions that fuqaha have talked about. And hopefully you will be able to link in between the two. The first is Islam, number two is aql, number three is bulugh. Let's say a person is Muslim, aqil, and baligh. But they need to meet two other requirements in order for their fasting to be valid. In order for their fasting to be valid. The first being a niyyah, intention. Now, let's say a person wants to fast tomorrow. In order the fasting to be valid, a person has to have the niyyah. Sometimes we go by the whole day, right? We go by the whole day, we don't eat the food from morning to evening. Will that be seen as fasting? Will that be considered fasting? Why not? The reason is there isn't any intention behind. So this is why ulama, they say, النية تميز العادة من العبادة أو العبادة من العادة. What is a distinct mark and difference between the two? It is your niyyat that will separate and differentiate between what is something that you do as a habit versus something what you do as a ibadah. It is your niyyat that will be a defining factor here. So therefore, niyyat is the foundation. And after we know about the niyyat, there is one thing I want to clarify here. Many people think niyyat is something that you have to verbalize. Is it necessary that you have to verbalize the niyyat? For example, I fast or I fast today for the month of Ramadan for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes we see this ibadah, this line written, right? So is it necessary for the person to verbalize and the niyyat? Anyone? No. So what is the best way to authenticate your niyyat?
Intention.
That is, of course, what we are talking about. But how do you authenticate your niyyah? So one thing which is important to understand, an-niyyatu amalul qalb. Intention relates to your heart. Intention is the act of your heart, not the act of your tongue. Therefore, it is mustahab, advisable that you verbalize your niyyat, but it is not a requirement. So just you make this niyyat in your heart, that is sufficient. That is sufficient. So the amal that you do, it proves, for example, somebody who eats suhoor in the morning, in the pre-dawn meal. So when a person wakes up in the morning and eats the suhoor, what does it mean? Does it mean that he's eating breakfast? Or does it mean that he is eating it with the intention to observe the fast? Right? So the amal itself will prove the action. Therefore, we need to understand that fast, in terms of any fast, whether it is Ramadan or other types of fast, it is not necessary. However, fuqaha, they have encouraged and advised that we verbalize it just for the sake of greater reward. And we remain further mindful of the act that we engage. So this is with respect to the niyyat. The other condition after niyyat that is necessary for the validity of fasting is the person needs to be free from the things that break the fast. For example, I made the niyyat and now I start the fasting, but I am at the same time involved in things that are contrary to fasting. For example, I'm eating at the same time, drinking at the same time. Or in case of women, they are in their menstrual cycle. Or in certain situations that they are restricted from observing the fast. So if a person is in that state, that means his intention is no longer valid, because as we say, action speaks louder than words, right? So if I intend to fast, then my actions must, come in full conformity with my niyyat. It must conform to my niyyah. If it is other way around, then it will not be seen, because it is all about actions. So these are in total 5 prerequisites: Islam, aql, bulugh, niyyat, and the last, to be free from things that are contrary to the act of fasting. Okay. Now, as we move forward, the list of people, as we talked about, who are exempt from fasting. So this is also important for us to know, especially those who are elderly, those who are sick, those who are in certain states and conditions. This is again out of rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that as important as fasting is in Islam, but out of the compassion and kindness of Allah to his ibad, he did not obligate it indiscriminately, unconditionally. There are situations, because Allah knows, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, human beings, they are created in the state of weakness. Regardless of our strength, we all have certain weaknesses and certain conditions that we will find ourselves perhaps overwhelmed by the condition, and we will not be able to comply the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, who are the people exempt from the fast. So the first, as we all know, I want to discuss this one, the sickness. What is the first one? Sickness. And now the definition of sickness differs from person to person and also from medical point of view to Shari'i point of view. In medical terminology, sickness has a very broad definition. And similar is the case, and our understanding of, by the way, this is something interesting, like the medical definition of sickness is very broad, but our understanding of sickness is even broader than that. Even broader than that. But the Shari'i definition of sickness is further restricted. Further restricted. So these are the three layers of understanding on the topic. So our personal understanding of sickness has zero consideration when it comes to Sharia. Something that I consider as sick, as being sick, but if Sharia doesn't see it as sick, then it will not be given any credibility. Do you follow? Now, what then takes place, or what takes place, or what plays a role in this regard is that, the medical and the Shari'i understanding. These are the two things. And therefore, fuqaha, it is, subhanAllah, it makes perfect sense as we live in this society and deal with different types of sicknesses. In the classical books of fiqh, we find often that it is mentioned, when you have an issue, a health condition that is restricting you from fast, then you must consult with a doctor. The doctor is to be Muslim and expert in the field. Why? Because he or she is aware the delicacy of the matter and the seriousness of the matter. For example, fasting, if you ask a non-Muslim, he doesn't have any clue about it. But if you ask a Muslim doctor, then he knows, because it is an obligation in Islam. So if a Muslim doctor says something about the sickness, then it becomes, binding and it becomes authoritative. So with respect to sickness, all the scholars and mazahib fiqhiyya, they agree that this gives the dispensation to the person who is sick and exempt him or her from fasting. But what type of sickness is the one that we are talking about that will exempt the person from observing the fast? There are three types that fuqaha they have talked about. Allama ibn Abidin Shami rahimahullah ta'ala in his Radd al-Muhtar mentions, and Mawsu'at al-Fiqhiyya and Zad al-Mustamta as well, and other books of fiqh. So they say a sickness that a person, if he or she is to fast, it will threaten their life. This is number one type. A person who observes a fast, and the fasting will threaten the life of the person if he or she is to continue fasting. This is the most serious and severe of all. Like, for example, somebody who suffered a heart attack, let's say, cardiac arrest, and right away he needs to be treated and he needs to take certain medicines. And if he doesn't break the fast, if he doesn't avoid the fast, it is going to put his life on basically in danger. So any sickness that is going to threaten the life of the person, that is the most serious of all, definitely it will give the exemption to the person. The other type of sickness is the one that will aggravate the situation and make the sickness worse than before. Worse than before. And a person will suffer as a result of that. A serious suffering, al-mashaqqatu shadida, as the scholar said, a serious suffering. Some forms of high diabetic patients, they fall in this category. And third category is the one that's minor sickness. You don't really suffer from that, although you feel some effect of it, like cold and headache, etc. So this sickness, the first type and the second type, will give and get the discount and concession in fasting. What is the first type? Like life-threatening situation. Number two, a sickness that really gets worse as a result of fasting because of, for example, the body dehydrates. For example, body doesn't get nutrition that is necessary for the body to recover. So things of this sort result into giving the discussion to the person. But the mild type of sickness has no consideration. For example, cold, even mild flu and fever. All of these things are not in this category for the person to be exempt from the fasting. And therefore, like I said, consulting with a doctor and seeking the advice of a Muslim doctor is of paramount importance in this case. Now, after sickness, the next one is travel. The next one is travel. When we talk about travel, first and foremost, in the month of Ramadan, it is discouraged and not advisable to travel unnecessarily. Unnecessary travels should be avoided because it will really disturb your routine, and it may even affect your pattern of fasting also, right? So therefore, this is something very important, that if there is not emergency or there is not something that is necessary for you to attend or travel, we should avoid all of those travels. Now, if a person needs to travel, then of course Sharia gives this discount for the person, and this is proven by the hadith of Rasulullah. We find the hadith in Sahih Bukhari that Sahabi radiallahu anhu, he says, "Kunna nusafiru ma'a Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." We would travel at times with Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. وَمِنَّا مَنْ يَفْطِرُ وَمِنَّا الصَّائِمُ. There would be people among us who would not fast. But at the same time, there would be people who would observe the fast. So from this hadith, we learn that there is a dispensation given to the traveler. But at the same time, we also learn that fasting during travel, if it is not too difficult, is highly advisable. Because you have to understand, one day in Ramadan, if you miss that out intentionally, cannot equate the fast of the whole year. This is the hadith of Rasulullah. If you miss out one day of Ramadan in terms of fasting without any genuine reason, a person in an attempt to make up for one day in terms of its spiritual sense, okay, and he or she spends the whole year, still it cannot make it up completely. So therefore, we should do everything that is possible not to miss any day of fasting, even when we are to travel. But there are a few masail in regards to this. First and foremost, who is musafir shar'i? Because, for example, somebody who just steps out of the city and goes to the nearest location, will he be considered as a traveler in Sharia? No, because we know there is a set destination and distance a person has to travel that far in order for him or her to avail this discount. And the distance is about 88 kilometers, right? 88 kilometers, 40 miles. So you double that. So it's 85 to 88 kilometers is the distance, the duration, the distance that a person has to travel. And going that far, he will become musafir. But there are two possible scenarios that a person may run into. Number one, let's say tomorrow is Ramadan and you are already in the state of fasting from tonight. And so in the state of travel from tonight. So you left to XYZ destination, a far destination tonight. And of course, we know fasting starts from Fajr, right? So your journey predated from fast. Your journey predated the fast itself, because you were already in the state of fasting when the day of Ramadan came in, the time of the fasting. So in this case, now this discount is available for you if you wish to not fast because of the situation or time zone issue, etc., whatever it may be. So you can avoid fasting, but of course you will have to make it up later on. So sorry, I forgot to mention this point. When it comes to sickness, of course, as we discussed the different types of sickness, but we have to also understand those who miss as a result of sickness, they have to make those days up later on. They have to make up those days later on. But when we talk about sickness, it is also of two types. There is one sickness that is temporary. There is one that is temporary, that you happen to be in that, and then you know you are being treated and you will recover from it. This is one type. But there is another one that is incurable one, terminally ill, as we say, terminally ill. So this is very important. Please pay attention to this point. So somebody who is temporarily ill, and as a result of the sickness, he or she missed certain days of the fast, certain days of Ramadan, they must make it up later on as soon as possible. they cannot pay fidya. They cannot pay fidya in lieu of the days that they have missed. Why? Because their sickness is temporary. Their sickness is temporary. Therefore, they have to, the only option they have is qada. Whereas the other type of sickness is concerned, a person is terminally ill and doctors, they have advised him not to fast, and there is no hope for the person to recover from that in the foreseeable future. And that type of sickness that prevents a person from fast, scholars they say that if that individual is able to fast in the shortest season of the year, for example in December, because the days are quite short, so in that case he is still, or she is still, must observe the fast not in the month of Ramadan, actually when they are able to. But even then they are not able to fast, even in the month of December, month of January, despite time being very, very short. Now they have been given this permanent discount not to observe the fast, but then they can pay fidya in lieu of each day that we generally know, fidya, right? So this is for them, but not for the other people. So when it comes to traveler, it's the same ruling. So if he was already in the state of travel and now the Ramadan or the day came in, so he has this discount if he wants to use it. And then he has to make that up later on. But the other scenario is this, so please listen to this part. So let's say you are going to travel in the midday, after, so your fasting starts first and your journey starts later on. Okay. So the timing of fast as it starts, as it kicks in, you have to see whether you are muqim or musafir. You are stationary or in the state of travel. So if you are to leave at 10 o'clock in the morning, for example, so when the fast began, you were not a traveler. You were not a traveler. So can you avail this discount? This is the question. No. He says no. And any other mujtahid here?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, mashallah. So there is ikhtilaf now.
If your state of travel ends before the fasting ends, then you should fast.
If your state of travel ends
before the fasting time ends, then you should fast.
What matters here is the distance, regardless of the duration. Distance, what matters, not the duration of journey, right? Because now we live in the supersonic age of the flying machines and supersonic planes, let's say, right? You could be traversing the distance as far that would take a month in the past. Now it could be in a few hours. In fact, they're working on a technology that in an hour, I think, they want you to be able to visit the space and return back in an hour, right? So, and it is possible, hypothetically speaking, but I'm not going to go into the tangent. But the point being, the distance, what matters, not the duration. So what he said, was actually correct. The reason being, you have to consider the beginning of your fast, whether or not you were stationary. If you were muqim at that time, because this discount is going to be given to you not at that time, later on. You understand? Because when you started your fast, you were muqim, and fasting is an obligation on the person who doesn't have any reason. You were intention, because it is possible your flight could get cancelled, right? Or your plan may alter, and it may change. So until that happens, Sharia is based on facts. It's not assumptions. You have, of course, your ticket ready and you have planned everything, but until that situation takes place, the discount or the ruling will not apply to you. Therefore, a person who is in that state, he must observe the fast. Now, if he observes the fast, so what should he do then as he starts his journey? In Fiqh Hanafi, Ibn Abidin rahimahullah ta'ala mentions, he must do everything that it takes and possible to maintain the fast and continue the fast and complete the fast. However, because of XYZ reason, if he breaks or she breaks, then they are allowed to do so, and they can simply make that up later on. Because the time that they are breaking their fast, they are already in this state of journey. Understand? They cannot do that ahead of time. That is the difference between the two. Now, there is another issue that sometimes people ask me this question, and that is with respect to the time zone. Let's say if you are to travel from west to east, from Vancouver to east, so you should anyway continue your fast because what is to your advantage in this case? Time is to your advantage, right? Time is to your advantage because you start your fasting later, but then you get to complete earlier. So therefore, you should anyway continue your fast. But the question that generally people ask is this: for example, you travel whether it's from Vancouver or anywhere. So when you reach your destination, or let's say you are still in the flight, and you happen to see the sunset, but should you follow the time zone that you are in or the time zone that you departed from? Departed from. Somebody said departed from. So, mashallah, most of you, what you said is correct. So you have to follow the time zone that you find, because what does Allah say? Shuruk ghurub al-shams wa tulu' al-fajr, based on your geographic location that you find yourself in. Because when you left that location, that is now behind. You are no longer there to follow it. Therefore, you cannot count that location to validate your fast or to break your fast or to follow your fast. What you need to do is that the time zone that you are in. So I remember one time I was traveling in the month of Ramadan, and it was actually 4 years before. So it was my flight was 1:30. So I left, and of course I flew over Arctic Circle. From here I was going to Saudi Arabia. So as I was flying over, so there is no night at all, right? When you go that far and to the north, so it's like 6 months day completely. And I happened to find one individual, a flight, was a very kind person, of course not Muslim, and I was one of the things that is quite good in these days. You on your screen you get to see the time zones, like different time zones, the time zone that you are in, other time zones. So as I would look outside of the window, it is like very bright daylight, and the time shows to me is like 2:30 a.m. 2:30 a.m. So of course it's a different issue and fiqh mas'ala. Locations like this where there is no sunset or very late sunset and things like that, how do you keep your fast? So the authentic and the predominant position, fiqh position in this regard, is that you follow the nearest location where there is a sunset. So I asked him that there is no sunset here, so which country is actually the country that has sunset at this time of the year? So he pointed out to me one of the countries in the far towards the east, the southern part of Europe. So I looked at, so I could see on my screen, this part is completely very bright, but this side is completely dark, and the darkness starts to increase. So I looked at that time, and I broke my fast. It was, I think, 3 a.m. according to that time location. So what I'm trying to say, obviously I left from Vancouver. I didn't follow the time of Vancouver because I'm no longer in Vancouver. So you have to follow the time, whether you are in flight or on geographic location, the time of the time zone of that particular location. So this is very important. Likewise, when you travel from east to west, then it is to your disadvantage. Your fasting is going to be very, very long, right? But nonetheless, whether it is long or short, you cannot complete your fast until there is a sunset taking place. Until there is a sunset taking place, whether it is 18 hours or 20 hours or even beyond. If you do so, if you do break your fast, then that day you will have to make it up later on, because sunset has to take, that is the threshold to break your fast. So that is how much time do we have? That's 6:25. Ji? 7:25. 40%. So the discussion of the of fasting, of course, is very vast. Like, I'm trying to just summarize some of the important masail. Inshallah, I will hopefully be able to complete this in the next 20 minutes, bismillah. So the after travel, what is the next condition that gives a discount to the person after travel? It is for the women, their menstruation and also their postnatal bleeding. Women who happen to encounter this on a monthly basis, of course, so in the month of Ramadan without any exception. So, sorry, it actually refers to pregnancy and breastfeeding. This is what I'm talking about. Sorry, my mistake. So what I'm talking about, the next condition, which is the third one in this category, and it is given to the women, pregnancy and breastfeeding. These two conditions, of course, exclusively for women, but what is important for them to know, just a few days ago, one sister, she asked me that she's expecting the baby, and then I think after a few months down the road, so can she avail this discount and exempt herself from fasting? So fuqaha, they have stated that what is important for us to understand in this scenario, in this case, three things. Number one, a very good reason for the person to think that her fasting is going to affect her life or the life of the child, or the overall health of the baby because of the breastfeeding or because of the pregnancy, or the experience of the past. For example, somebody who observed the past in the past and they noticed that they suffered as the result of the fasting, they were not able to produce enough milk, for example, or they suffered other forms of weaknesses, which is not good for the baby or for the fetus and the pregnancy, or a doctor advising them. So these are the three conditions that the scholars have mentioned. If it is not just based on the assumption of the person, because I'm in this state and therefore I assume that I'm given this discount. No, there has to be an eminent, clear medical condition that restrict the person, or the advice of the doctor, or the previous experience of the person. So one of the three, if it is there, then they can use this dispensation and they can exempt themselves from the fasting. However, again, they will have to repeat this later on once they are in the state, in a appropriate state to recover this. And the last category in this regard is an extremely old individual, a very frail and thin and very, very elderly person, decrepitude age, as we say in English. Somebody who is like 90 plus, because somebody who reaches that level, that level of age, now their immunity is very, very weak. At the same time, their diet is very, very limited. They barely eat, right? I remember Master Shamim Sahib rahimahullah ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, relate his ranks in the akhirah. So I have seen him a number of times, before he passed away. He would eat only once a day and even half a bread, barely, not more than that. So age is a factor here. So because of their physical condition, and fasting requires strength, fasting requires energy, right? So Sharia has given this discount to people who are that frail and that old and completely not fit to fast, that they can also exempt themselves from the fast, and they can, because there is no possibility for them to get younger, right? They are only going to get older and weaker. Therefore, they can pay fidya in lieu of the days that they miss. In fact, this ayat, the Mawlana Jazakallah khairan recited, mashallah, beautiful tilawa. وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ يُطِيقُونَهُ. Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, he says, this applies to people of very old age. Because of their condition, they can pay fidya and not fast. So now, what breaks the fast is very important discussion, and we need to understand. So when we talk about the things that break the fast, there is a general understanding, but there are certain rules and qawa'id fiqhiyya that we need to understand, because sometimes we all the imams, mashallah, we get many questions in the month of Ramadan. For example, I did this, or I took this shot, or in this injection, or this blood test, etc., etc. Is my fast valid? Right. So if we have the the holistic understanding of the topic, then it will help us to judge our situation on our own. So therefore, when we talk about things that break the fast, it is further divided into two categories. First is what breaks the fast, but also require qada and kafara both. And second one is just break the fast, requires qada only, but not kafara, which means kafara means, and we know kafara is very serious in this case, the 60 consecutive days of fast without any break in between. In addition to the day that person has broken the fast. So like 61 days straight. It's a serious punishment, and there is nothing like this. And this one, just because a person deliberately violated the sanctity of the month of Ramadan and the sacredness of the month of Ramadan, and because of this there is a heavy penalty on him or her. So looking at the first category, acts that break the fast but also require qada and kafara, there are some foundational understandings that I want to mention for us to know what defines breaking the fast first. كيف يفسد الصوم? So the first thing is, there is a hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha and also Ibn Abbas radiallahu anha. Both of them, they say, if I may to ask any of you, how do you define breaking of the fast? So you may have, because the time is limited, I don't want to open the floor. But what I'm trying to say, if you can think on your own, maybe now or later on, will be a good, exercise, intellectual exercise for you. But in light of the principles of Sharia, Aisha radiallahu anha, she says, so we have to understand this, that something that goes in the body breaks the fast. But when we talk about something goes in the body, this is why scholars have said, يفطر الصوم بدخول مفطر معتبر إلى جوف معتبر عن طريق معتبر أو بوصول معتبر وبدون موانع المعتبرة الشرعية. This is a قاعدة فقهية. So what does it mean? It means that first and foremost, something has to go in the body. What is the opposite meaning of that? Something that comes out of the body doesn't break the fast, right? So who can respond in light of this? The issue of blood test. Will that break the fast?
No.
Why?
It comes out.
It comes out, right? Doesn't go in. So there you go, you have the answer. Now, the second question, what about injections? It goes in. The first was, of course, going out, coming out. But this one goes in, or let's say drip. Will that break the fast?
Anything energizes the body.
No, it doesn't go.
Extra nutrition in terms of injection.
You understand Arabic, right? So what the qaida that I mentioned, he got also, but also, mashallah, he must have the knowledge too. So the point being, what the fuqaha said, دخول معتبر, مفطر معتبر, دخول معتبر, جوف معتبر. So, body cavity is interesting. So what is important for us to know, first and foremost, let me give the answer. When you have something being injected to your arm, okay, it will not break the fast. Why will it not break the fast? Though something goes in, the reason being, things do not enter into your main body cavity, the passage of consequences, they say, which is bottom in this case, the mi'da, right? Because something that has to go directly to your mi'da, to your stomach, directly. So when you get an injection, it goes either to your veins or the muscle. It doesn't go directly to your stomach. So in other words, anything that goes directly to your stomach will break the fast. So for example, something that goes through your mouth, something that goes through your nose, because there is a direct passage connected. Therefore, subhanAllah, you can see when these holes, they are going down inside your throat, and they are connected down all the way to your stomach. What is another, وصول معتبر, منافذ الأصلية, as they say فقهاء, منافذ الأصلية المعتبرة. So mouth, nose, and the rectal passage as well. It has direct connection. So all of these ones will break the fast if anything goes through them, anything. And so this answers this question that when you get injections or even drip. So in terms of drip, as somebody said here, because it energizes your body, of course, no doubt. Therefore, it is makruh for somebody to get this IV without any medical reason, but it will not break the fast because it doesn't go directly to your stomach. Okay. So this is this is the qaida. So something that goes in will break the fast. Okay. And the other point is that breaks the fast is sexual activity, the proper intercourse. Of course, this proper intercourse will definitely break the fast, and this is another important breaker here. And the third being anything that is besides the intercourse. It depends on the nature of the situation and the climax and the ejaculation. But other than that, it will not break the fast. But in terms of the proper intercourse, whether or not a person has reached the climax, it will break the fast right away. It will break the fast right away. So the third thing in this case is the menstruation and postnatal bleeding for the women. So this is another breaker of the fast. Now, the acts that break the fast, the detail of this, and require qada and kafara both. So essentially, it is three things: something that you eat deliberately, something you drink deliberately, or sexual activity that is intentionally done with the proper intercourse. All of these things will break the fast right away, and also will require a person to pay kafara. And the details of the kafara, hopefully, we'll be able to cover, inshallah, later on. So these are the three essential acts. Now, the acts that are going to break the fast, but not going to require a person kafara, only qada. Kafara, no kafara, only qada. So what fuqaha have mentioned, ma yutaghazza wa ma yutadawa wa ma yutalazzaz. These are the three things I mentioned. Something that you eat that you enjoy, and you do it intentionally. Something that nourishes your body, something that pleases your body or benefits your body. In this case, fast will be broken and will require qada and kafara both. But if breaking of the fast doesn't mean these two things, ma yutalazzaz wa ma yutadawa, and wama, the other thing that I mentioned, tadawi, talazzuz, and tata'um, that the body nourishes itself. So if it is not that, it will break your fast, but will not require kafara. What is the example of that? The non-edible things, if somebody eats non-edible things, for example, raw lentils, or someone might say, what about the salad? Salad is also raw. So will that require a person qada and kafara or no?
Yes.
Because it is in itself a food, right? It is eaten as that. So something that is not normal to do, if somebody does that, it will break, because eventually it is going in. Therefore, it will break. And then at the same time, it will require qada. But will it require kafara? No. Why? Because your body is not nourishing itself from that food. So raw lentils, for example, or uncooked rice, or dove somebody eats, all of those things will break and require qada, but not kafara. Okay. Likewise, sexual activity besides proper intercourse will definitely break the fast if a person is to ejaculate as a result of that. In between the spouse, there could be examples. I don't want to go into the further details of it. But the point being that apart from proper intercourse, any activity in between the spouses that lead the person to the ejaculation will break the fast and will require only qada, not kafara. Why? Because it is not the proper full scale type of enjoyment the person gets out of that. This is the reason. And the other example of that, this, for example, somebody which is haram in Islam, somebody is to just please himself with his own hand and reaching the climax as a result of that. All of these are the acts that will break the fast and will require only qada but not kafara. And likewise, some form of medicine that goes in the body, like the enema, as they say, through the rectal passage. Sometimes there are certain medicines that go in, and other forms of medicine. So nasal spray, another example of that. If you have nasal spray, if you use it during the hours of your fast, it will break your fast. Why? Because of this connection to your throat. It goes down, and it is going to break the fast. So these are the things that will break the fast. Likewise, applying a medicine to a deep cut on your belly or to the brain that has the deep cut in it, and the medicine goes all the way in. So in that case, because it is reaching in some very inside of the stomach, so it is going to break the fast. So anyway, the time is again limited. So let's move on to the next example. Things that you do accidentally, for example. Things that you do accidentally. What do I mean? So how do you define between forgetfulness and accidental act? The difference between the two. Something that you have forgotten completely, like somebody who eats and drinks or does things, but he has forgotten that he or she was in a state of fast. So this is out of forgetfulness. But what about khata, as the fuqaha they say in Arabic? Khata is that you know the state that you are in, but by accident you did something that broke the fast. What is the example of that? Somebody who was eating suhoor, for example, and looked at his watch, and it was behind the schedule, behind the right time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So he was following that clock. But when he finished his suhoor, he realized that 10 minutes have already gone by. So this you knew that you were preparing or eating suhoor because your intention was to fast, but something happened that hindered this. Likewise, when you do the gargle during the hours of the fast, you know that you are in the state of fasting, but accidentally the drop of water slipped through your throat and it went in, and therefore it will break the fast. So this is the accidental act. Now, with respect to the other example for the sisters, start of menstruation or postnatal bleeding, even if there are few minutes left for the woman to complete the fast, even if that happens just 1 hour before, few minutes before, it will break the fast right away. It will break the fast right away. And as it breaks the fast, now the next few days they cannot fast. So therefore, they have to count those days and make it up later on. But two things I want to mention very quickly, subhanAllah, is that says on time. So I will end with this masala, inshallah.
So one question from online.
One question online. Let me complete this one, if I may complete this masala. Ajizal? No, just to complete this one masala, that's it. Sorry?
Finish it and we'll do a lunch. Finish it up and do a lunch.
You finish this masala or finish this?
Finish this masala.
Okay. So, with respect to the menstruation, there is some form of misunderstanding among living folks that I want to address this. Whether just few minutes left to break the fast when a woman experiences menstruation, like I said, it will break the fast right away. And that is important. And that day they have to count as in the list of the days that they have missed. Okay. And now let's go to the other scenario in which woman, found that the cycle completed of the menstruation, it happened so during the hours of the day. So of course she had already started the day as in a state of impurity, menstruation. Therefore that day cannot count because the time counts is from the very first moment of Tulur al-Fajr, whether or not you were free from menstruation and bleeding. So if few hours have gone by, that means that day is also not in as the day of fasting. So therefore you have to add that day as well in that. But how do we spend the first day and the beginning day and the end day? This is another thing I wanted to address. Let's say somebody experienced menstruation in the early hours of the day, so that the fasting is gone. As the fasting is gone, of course, they are no longer in the state of fasting. They are free to eat and drink. In fact, Imam Zaydari rahimahullah ta'ala has mentioned in the book that it is necessary on the women from that day all the way until they complete that to eat, not to avoid eating and drinking during the hours of the days of Ramadan. Why? Because it is going to be seen as tashabbuh bis-siyam, imitating the apparent state of fasting, because it is haram for women in those days to fast. But it doesn't mean that you eat and drink openly. It does not mean that. What it means that, of course, you eat and drink, but giving the due respect to the month of Ramadan and the hours of the fast, you do so quite secretly. And when the day completes, like I said, when the cycle completes, now there are hours left for the day to complete, the fasting hours, right? So as soon as it is over, now they are free from that condition. So fuqaha, they have said now it is wajib on her to imitate the state of fasting out of respect to the month of Ramadan. It is wajib on her. So this is what I wanted to address. So we will end here, and somebody has a question.
Yeah, there's one question is like, if someone is doing highly demanding, physically demanding job, that person is exempt from fasting or not?
So this was one of the points that I wanted to add in the discussion. Obviously, time didn't permit me to go. So fuqaha, they have mentioned irhaqul ju'i wal atash, this mas'ala, which means that somebody who is in the state of extreme hunger and thirst, and will they be allowed to break the fast or not? This is one aspect of it. The other aspect is what he's asking. He knows the nature of his work. So will he be given this exemption not to fast, period? So these are the two things. So with respect to the question, first, what we need to understand, what we must do in the month of Ramadan, as much as possible, and I know, mashallah, there are some brothers who have this habit to take the whole month off, especially for those brothers and sisters who know that their job is very demanding physically. Those who have that nature of work, they should try to avail this opportunity of their annual vacation and use it for the month of Ramadan, especially for those who have this physically difficult job. However, if they cannot use, so it will not give them the discount from the very start not to fast. They must fast. However, if the work is such that now they have drained their energy and exhausted themselves completely, and now they have reached the state irhaqul ju'i wal atash, in extreme hunger and thirst, they must eat or drink something, otherwise they will suffer physically. So now they are given this dispensation to break the fast, and of course they must make it up later on. These are the two different things. But at the same time, fuqaha, they have mentioned this thing must not happen out of his optional choice. Work is, of course, work. You have no choice to do. I remember one time I got a call from a sister. She asked me that she is in this, as they say, some people are this, they have this mentality of physical activities. So she asked me, because I'm in the routine of doing daily exercise for 2 to 3 hours, and I cannot miss in the month of Ramadan. So I will be doing that in the month of Ramadan, but of course I will dehydrate myself. So as a result of that, will I be getting the discount to miss the fasting? So fuqaha have stated, something that you bring on your own as a condition, you will not get the discount. If it is not out of choice, then you get the discount. So I hope that this is clear. So inshallah, we will, if there is any question, any from the audience after Salatul Isha, you can inshallah see me in person. I will try to address within that Aziz. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdik. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون سلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Right after Adhan, we should do a comment, is it fair?
Yes. I told him that 1 hour will not be enough.
This is beautiful.
I'm
الله أكبر